Hello there friends and welcome. For today's Elden Ring guide we have everything about FTH Casters, fully updated for the DLC. So yes, we will be showcasing our character against even the toughest DLC bosses. FTH Casters have always been amazing because of how versatile they are. You truly have an incantation for everything. With spells that can, for example, absolutely destroy the bigger, larger enemies in the game like dragons, for thousands worth of damage with just a few casts. Amazing area of effect potential as well, perfect for normal exploration. Even better now with the Shadow of the Air 3 DLC. With even great sniping capabilities with one of the longest range targeting spells in the game. Followed by of course many other powerful incantations to destroy even the toughest DLC bosses. No matter how fast they are, with this character you'll be able to face tank and melt them just fine with our Pure Faith Incantation caster. That's not to mention of course the many buffs for higher damage, damage negation, healing and regeneration. So without further ado, let us get into our updated Pure Faith caster guide for the DLC and main game. First with the best incantations you have and their uses. Right, so let us start with the best spells against the different type of bosses. After all, it's the toughest content in the game. For the bigger, larger bosses, nothing is better than Past Threats and its big upgrade for the DLC, Past Threat Spears. When you cast these, you will fire loads and loads of projectiles. The best part is when you cast against large targets, for example the best ones being dragons, the projectiles will actually hit their body parts multiple times for huge damage. So for example, against a dragon you simply have to lock on its head, then cast the spell ideally under its belly or behind its legs, because the projectiles then pass through their bodies multiple times for loads and loads of damage. Trust me, against a dragon this will absolutely melt them. Even some of the bigger targets like the Dancing Lion in the DLC. Against smaller humanoid enemies however, it's not really that useful. For that we have another very powerful spell. And it is Blood Flame Talons. When you cast this, your character will swipe at the enemy, followed by a huge explosion. The explosion is actually what deals damage, the slashing is just for flavor. The explosion itself deals fire damage and also applies a nasty bleed damage over time effect upon the enemy. Fire damage is great because it has the biggest source of extra damage modifiers from gears and buffs. Meanwhile, bleed of course is as always amazing because it's the easiest way of dealing high damage, as it is directly tied to how high the enemy's hit points are. Perfect for the DLC. Most importantly, this spell has multiple benefits. It's cast very fast and you can chain cast it. The FP cost is very low, the same for the stamina cost. Why this matters? Well, because the DLC bosses are all hyper aggressive, so the small casting time speed on Blood Flame Talons is a must have if you want to properly face tank and cast your spells against them, without of course having to keep spamming dodge forever and waiting for openings, which I personally find very boring. I'm all about face tanking even as a caster. Especially good for beginners. Overall, Blood Flame Talons is one of the easiest ways I found of defeating these faster single target bosses. Now do remember that Blood Flame Talons isn't just good for bosses, it's also great for common enemies. By the way, speaking about single target fast bosses, we also have another amazing spell. And amusingly enough, it is the very starter spell for the Prophet class, Catch Flame. Despite being a starter spell, it is quite powerful, better than most of the other spells in the game as far as offensive incantations, and can carry you even through the DLC itself. Catch Flame has many of the same benefits as Blood Flame Talons. It's cast very fast, has low FP cost, and surprisingly good damage. It has an upgrade called O Flame that you can get later in the game. That's pretty similar, except O Flame can be charged for a bigger burst. While the speed is slightly slower than Catch Flame, the damage is better. Honestly, these two spells are so good that I found them to be the best incantation tools for a pure offensive caster against even the DLC final boss himself. Anyways, Blood Flame Talons and Catch Flame plus O Flame are your best tools against bosses, the fast ones at least. Lastly, when it comes to bosses, let's talk about the best ways of debuffing them. And for that we have first, Greyol's Roar, a dragon spell. This spell hits a huge area around you, and will not only debuff the enemy's damage, but also even increase your own damage against them, so it's amazing. The damage itself can be quite good, especially during normal exploration. It pretty much one-shots a lot of enemies, but I prefer to use it against bosses for the extra debuffing potential. Besides that, we have our Scarlet Rot spells, such as Scarlet Aeonia, Malenia's own unique spell, which is kinda easy to get, for the DLC at least, even if Malenia is at the end game, because she's very easy with a Faith Caster, especially if you spam, for example, Blood Flame Talents or Catch Flame. But anyways, for the main game you also have the Rot Dragon spells, such as Rotten Breath. It's been nerfed, sure, so won't deal Scarlet Rot as fast. Malenia's spell, on the other hand, will always inflict Scarlet Rot with just one cast. Even if it's somewhat slow, all it takes is for the flower to bloom, for the enemies to be affected by the rot, so you don't have to finish the casting animation. Scarlet Rot, of course, is very powerful because it's essentially a ticking time bomb. The enemy's hit points will keep on decreasing for huge amounts of damage over time. It's so good that if, for example, you're close to defeating a boss, but you're out of resources, you can just keep on the defensive and watch as the boss melts away. Always fun to have, including even against the final boss of the DLC. Now that we know the best incantations for destroying bosses, let's cover the best ones for normal exploration. First we have the Flame of Frenzy, a spell you can find very early, and will provide you with your best area of effect damage tool until the DLC. When you cast it, you unleash a huge amount of rays of fire that hit a deceptively big range. It is fire damage, which is great, and can easily poise break enemies with just a few casts. Can you use it against bosses? Sure, but it's a bit slow for them. Unless you're fighting a slow boss, that is. For the DLC, no way. For normal enemies, however, it's still good. On the DLC, however, you do have another, even better tool for area of effect. The new spell, Giant Golden Arc. It's kinda similar to the Glintstone Arc sorcerer spell, but essentially this will fire a huge, very wide golden arc that can even penetrate through multiple enemies, which is why it's great for area of effect. Lastly, the casting time is great, and you can charge it for higher damage, plus the damage itself is very good. You can hit for thousands worth of damage later on. Now let us talk about our best sniping spell, Frenzied Burst. It's also fire damage and has the highest range potential of any incantation. Honestly, it can snipe enemies from very far away. As a matter of fact, depending on how far away they are, it won't even alert the nearby enemies, so just keep on sniping them again and again. This can be somewhat useful against bosses that start very far away from you, like Malenia, but for others that quickly rush at your character, I would not bother. Now what about other spells, such as the ever so classic lightning spells with Lightning Spear, or the Black Flame ones? It's not that they're bad, it's just that I find them to be quite outclassed by the other spells I mentioned, especially for the DLC. But stuff like Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike can hit a wild area around you, while Black Flame can hit multiple enemies if charged and does inflict a nasty debuff to their maximum hit points. It's just that they are slow, right? So Catch Flame, NO Flame, Blood Flame Talents are much faster, much faster, and have higher damage potential as well by virtue of being fire. Anyways, now that we know the best damage spells, also debuffing ones for bosses and normal enemies, let's get into the second part of playing a pure Faith Caster, which is our buffing and defensive spells, of course. I'll start with the best one, Golden Vow. This only requires 25 faith, so it's actually great for most builds that can get away with it. And it is one of the best aura buffs for not only higher damage dealt, but also higher damage negation, so it is great for both extra offenses and defenses. The duration itself is also quite big, so will last you for most of any boss battle. Second, we have our regeneration spells, such as Blessing of the Air Tree, Blessing's Boon, And the weakest variant, but also quite useful, Bestial Vitality. This will constantly regenerate your hit points. Great for normal exploration and even boss battles because you can just spread buff of them before entering the boss arena. Besides that, we have our damage negation buffs to help you tank, even face tank. You have one for every element in the game, including physical, such as holy, fire, lightning, and so on. Starting with the weaker fortification variants, followed by the stronger ones, such as Lord's Divine Fortification, or Black Flame's Protection for physical. Just remember that Black Flame's Protection is unique in that it also reduces healing from all sources by 20%, which can be a bit annoying. As to which one you should use, well, it depends. Ideally, physical damage negation is better for the most part of the game, although in the DLC, a lot of enemy bosses deal physical plus minor elemental damage. So for someone like Mesmer the Impaler, you might prefer to go with Flame Fortification instead of higher physical damage negation. Oh, and do note that these buffs are all body buffs, so they will not work together. You can only have one of them at the same time. Yes, you also have other great buffing spells like Blood Flame Blade, but these are more for fighter mage types of character. I wanted this character to be a pure faith incantation caster. Now that we know what the best incantations and miracles are for everything, let's get into the best Ash of War for our faith caster, and it is Endure. Endure is what will let you properly spam your offensive incantations while face tanking bosses, as it not only provides an immense increase to damage negation, but also close enough to virtual invulnerability to stagger, which means even the most annoying bosses like Mesmer will not be able to stagger you out of your spells at all. So ideally, you just wanna activate Endure, go for some quick spells like Blood Flame Talons or Catch Flame, cast Endure again, and repeat. It truly is that simple. Or well, you can just keep on spamming dodge forever until you have a 3-second opening and repeat. I'd much rather just face tank them with Endure. Don't forget you can and should also use this to heal your character. So if you find yourself getting low on hit points or FP, activate Endure and drink your flask. Now let's at long last get into our stats and level up section for our Faith Caster. As always, 60 Vigor is ideal, especially if you wanna face tank even as a caster. Followed by 17 Arcane. This is important because 15 is required for Blood Flame Talons, the best spell you'll have in the DLC, for bosses of course, and Grail's Roar for our amazing debuff. After that, if you want as high Faith incantation damage possible, 80 Faith is the way to go. As I said, this character is meant to be a pure caster, so I didn't bother increasing my strength and dexterity at all for more weapons. The rest of the points can be spent into Mind, so you don't have to rely as much on FP flasks, but remember, both your Catch Flame and Blood Flame Talents have very little FP cost. Something like 30 is enough. Ideally, I'd say 40, which does put you above 150, it depends on what you want. And if you're playing this character from the start, definitely 15 Arcane for Blood Flame Talons at least, followed by a decent amount of Faith, like 25, then you can increase some Vigor, like 20 or 30, and go back into Faith for the highest damage, with some points into Mind if you prefer. Now what about your Endurance? Well, as you're going to see in the gear section, you can still equip medium armor just fine, so let's get into that. You actually want a weapon for our Endure Ash of War. I went with daggers because they have very high critical. You can easily go with a Sacred Dagger as it will then scale with Faith, and deals decent enough damage at least as far as clearing common trash in normal exploration. You might as well upgrade it to the Misericord Dagger instead, which has even higher criticals. For our Sacred Seal, early in the game you can just go with the Finger Seal of course, but later, because of our huge Faith, you absolutely want the Air 3 Seal, which is the seal with the highest incantation scaling for high Faith characters, thus the higher spell damage as well. Amusingly enough, it doesn't weigh anything at all, which is also great because we do have very low endurance. When talking about endurance before, I said you don't really need it for your spells or armor, and that is true. For example, I have the full Haligtree set here, which is medium armor, and does look nice for a Faith caster. and we are still at medium load. As a matter of fact, you can go with any armor combinations you want, so long as you are left at medium load. Remember that you have Endure for face tanking anyways, but it still helps to dodge enemy grabs and some other attacks if you need. Don't forget the Helix Knight Helm actually increases your faith by 2 points, which can help. Slightly anyways. If, however, you want the heaviest armor sets possible, I'm afraid you'll need the Winged Crystal tier, which is not necessary for this character, as we have better Flask effects, as I'll soon cover. You can also use the White Mask if you want higher damage. Its effect of extra damage when bleeding also applies to spells, which is why it's so good. And it is very easy to apply bleed to enemies with this build because of Blood Flame Talons. You can also pre-buff before boss battles by casting Seppuku before entering the arena. Something else you can do is equip the Mushroom Crown, as it will increase your damage, also spell damage just like the White Mask, whenever you inflict Scarlet Rot or Poison on the enemies. And as I mentioned before, it's very easy to inflict Rot by virtue of Melania's Scarlet Aeonia spell or the Rot Dragon Breath. The only issue is this is super heavy at 9. The White Mask is much, much lighter. Now let us cover our Talismans. Dragon Crest Great Shield is always a must-have if you wanna face tank bosses anyways. When combined with all of your faith buffs, you can achieve very high damage negation, especially with your 3 blessings from the DLC. For example, at max blessing, you can have even 83% damage negation against physical when buffed with Golden Vow, and a physical negation buff, or even 90% damage negation, close to 91, through Endure, which of course you'll be spamming during battle for casting spells without stagger. Which is why I said you don't need the heaviest of armors. Anyways, you can replace this for a damage boosting talisman, but I prefer to have more defensive power, especially on the hyper-aggressive DLC bosses. Speaking about extra damage, you can use Kindred of Wrath's Exaltation for the same reason as the Mushroom Mask, or the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, better combined with Blood Flame Talons. Besides that, Redagon's Icon is essential for higher spellcasting speed, and you can either go for more spell damage through, for example, Block Canvas Talisman, its lesser variant, the Faithful Canvas, or if you're using charged spells, Godfrey's Icon, great for the O-Flame spell. Just remember, the Catch Flame one cannot be charged. Yes, you can also use the Scorpion charms, such as Fire for extra flame damage, or Sacred for extra holy, but they do reduce your damage negation, something I don't enjoy late game, especially in the DLC where bosses deal super high damage. I'm just saying, if you wanna min max damage, you can go with them. Or another defensive talisman like Golden Braid for the maximum holy damage negation possible, which is amazing against both final bosses of the game, main game and DLC. You also have others like the Elemental boosting talismans. For consumables, just extra stamina regen ones like Turtleneck, and Boiled Crabs if you don't want to cast Black Flame's Protection, which reduces your healing. Now let us cover our Wondrous Physic Flask effects. Opaline Heart here as always for the amazing damage negation boost against all types including physical, followed by one of the elemental damage boosting tiers, Holy for holy damage of course, but most importantly, Flame Shrouding, because as I said, we do have a lot of very powerful fire spells. For almost anything, right? Area of effects, sniping, even fast bosses, it's all fire spells. You can also go with the Winged Crystal tier if you want to equip the heaviest of armors. Well, alright friends, so this was it for our Ultimate Faith Caster Guide post DLC. If you found it useful as always, please remember to like, subscribe, and also consider becoming a channel member if you can. I highly appreciate your support. Thank you for watching and see you next time, friends.